You have joined the inspiration session for Digital Accessibility and Inclusion, which is the first training module of the Digital Empowerment Project, a nationwide initiative organized by the 6 U.S. regional museum associations that is dedicated to providing free, self-paced training resources for small museums. This inaugural series of online trainings and resource toolkits focused on digital media and technology topics is made possible by funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a light-skinned white female with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, which is mostly straight today, despite the humidity down here in the Southeast that is trying to curl it up. I'm wearing a red dress and am sitting in front of a backdrop of my home office, which I wish looked more interesting. As the host for today's session, I would like to convey a few things to our attendees before we begin the program. The Digital Empowerment Leadership Team chose digital accessibility and inclusion as the first module in recognition of the fact that it is often the interaction between persons with impairments or disabilities and attitudinal, environmental, and technological barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. To prioritize digital accessibility is to ensure access to information and all functions of the digital tools each training module will cover, irrespective of a person's specific needs, actively working to break down those barriers. This first foundational module will provide training on how to integrate accessibility and inclusion into digital programs, social pages, and websites. Also, in this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute our physical sense of place, it is important to reflect on the land we each occupy and honor the Indigenous peoples who have called it home. I am speaking to you from Charleston, South Carolina, the historical homelands of the Natchez Cusco peoples. Wherever you are, let us acknowledge all Indigenous nations as living communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We, the Digital Empowerment Project team, recognize that our organizations and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society that perpetuated the exclusions and erasures of many Native peoples throughout the United States and beyond. We ask you to reflect on the place where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form the richness of our world and our profession. Thank you. And now for just a few housekeeping notes before we introduce today's presenters and dig into the content. I'd like to acknowledge today's ASL interpreter, who will be on the left side of your screen, and let you know that captioning for today's program is embedded in a box just below the YouTube player on our website with controls to adjust your experience. The best way to continuously refine our craft at the Museum Learning Hub is to listen to our attendees, and we ask that you share your candid feedback with us. Following today's program, you will be sent a link to a satisfaction survey. Sharing your experience through this survey will only take a few minutes and will greatly improve our work. We encourage you to pose questions to our presenters, which will be addressed at the end of the program after the presentations. Please type your questions in the chat. A digital empowerment team member will be gathering them. We will get to as many questions as time allows. However, we may not be able to address all questions during the live session, and other questions may arise after reflecting on a program. For this reason, we have set up an online community forum for raising questions, posting answers, and connecting with your fellow museum practitioners on the Museum Learning Hub website, which you can find at museum-hub.org. If you are looking for help between programs, please visit this forum, create a login, and post your questions. A member of the community or one of our student technology fellows will get back to you. Finally, to stay connected with us and be aware of future programs, please follow us on our social media channels. Links will be posted in the chat. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. First, we'll hear from Robin Marquis, the Accessibility Coordinator at the Peel Center for Baltimore History and Architecture in Baltimore, Maryland. Robin will be followed by Katie Menny, Curator of Education at the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport in Southport, North Carolina. And our final panelist will be Meredith Peruzzi, Director of the National Deaf Life Museum at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. You can learn more about our presenters from their bios, which are available on the Museum Learning Hub website. I am thankful for the time each has devoted to this session, and now I am pleased to turn the floor over to Robin Marquis for our first presentation.
Hi, thank you so much, Zinnia. My name is Robin Marquis. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a physically disabled, light, white-skinned person. I'm sitting in front of a turquoise fireplace, and I'm wearing a white and purple shirt. I'd like to begin by acknowledging with humility that the lands where the Peel in Baltimore is situated today are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock Indigenous Peoples. The vast coastal area today, known as Baltimore City, Maryland, sustained Indigenous peoples until the arrival of Europeans beginning in the 1600s. Over the next 400 years, many Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock communities were decimated, absorbed by larger villages or tribes, and or forced by the US federal government to move west beyond the Mississippi River with larger tribes. Since then, other tribal peoples have moved here in diaspora, including Lumbee peoples. We acknowledge the Peel stands on stolen lands, and I would like to thank the original authors of this text, Ashley Minner of the Lumbee tribe, Ryan A. Coons, and Peter Dayton. So I'm joining you today as the accessibility coordinator of the Peel. The Peel is home to the world's largest collection of Baltimore stories. We work with local creators, storytellers, griots, performers, artists, architects, historians, students, educators, and other culture keepers who employ the full range of artistic media and processes to produce and share their narratives of the city, its places, and the diverse peoples who have made Baltimore what it is today. We see ourselves as a new kind of civic museum, both a laboratory and a teaching museum, not just a treasure house, but also a production house of culture. So I started as the accessibility coordinator at the Peel in about 2018 as the first accessibility coordinator. And over the last 3 years, we've really invested in improving our access practices in a myriad of ways. But today I really want to focus on the role that technology has played since COVID last year and what we've been doing, how that shaped our work. So we ended up seeing this force to shift all of our programs to be virtual as an opportunity to increase our accessibility practices. And this really started because coincidentally, the exhibition that was interrupted by COVID that was supposed to go on in April of 2020 was called Redefine Able or Redefineable. It's a partnership with the University of Maryland, Audra Buck-Coleman and her graphic design students that was focusing on inclusive design and ableism. So because of this content, in thinking what were we going to do with this exhibition, how are we going to meet COVID, we really knew that doing anything virtual must be accessible. And we had the space, we had the team, we had an incredible group of community collaborators working with us who got to think about creative and inclusive design. So our first events that we started putting online had inclusive design at their center. One of the things that we did in order to achieve this was we partnered with an incredible organization called Virtual Ability. They enable people with disabilities to thrive in online virtual worlds. So they helped us create the entire exhibition in Second Life, which is a virtual world. So folks were able to explore the exhibition in a virtual setting. And on top of that, we developed an entirely new series of programs for the exhibition that really focused on accessibility in the digital world. We had to learn how to do inclusive and accessible online programming. And so we shared that in a few different workshops. And then we also hosted panels that talked about the impact of COVID on exhibitions and inclusion and what we were thinking and what we were asking other people to think about with that accessibility in the virtual sphere. So all of those events are still available on our website under past events, as well as a tour within Second Life of the museum that was built there. So because of this deep dive into digital accessibility, really the beginning of COVID, we made a commitment to provide access services regardless of if they were requested or not for all of our events moving forward. And so those services are quite a few things, but the main things are we always have live human-generated captioning. We always have an American Sign Language interpreter. And then after the event, all of our programs are available on our website. They're captioned. There's also transcripts available so folks can access those at their convenience. The thing we're really focusing on now on our growing edge is around providing more consistent and thorough visual and audio descriptions. I work with my colleague, Cheryl Fogel-Hatch, who's an incredible blind museum professional and accessibility expert. Her and I have been working on a visual description project for our museum with the software Coyote. We've also begun offering visually described tours led by David London, who's our resident magician at our museum. And those have been in partnership with another community member, Marguerite Woods, and the National Federation of the Blind, which is actually located in Baltimore. We're very lucky to work with these folks. And the thing I want to end on are the 4 elements that we've really seen as the cornerstones of this work. If we didn't focus on these areas, we wouldn't be able to provide accessibility in the way we do, both virtually and in person. And the first thing is that cultural access in general is an integral value of our museum. So when we started thinking about accessibility in 2018, including and expanding that access to the disability community fit in with what our other initiatives, and was really intersectional from the beginning. So we weren't just thinking about disabled folks, we were thinking about them as an intersectional person. The second thing was how we structured the responsibility of accessibility. So it was really intentional to have a combination of both a leader who was leading the work around accessibility, myself, and coupled with all of our staff learning and incorporating access into their roles. So it's not just me doing it. Everyone that works on our team has learned about the various elements of access that they need to be focusing on. So we're all working together. And then something we did right at the beginning and have continued to think about and focus on is our communication, especially externally. So the first thing we did in 2018 was an overhaul of our web presence. We updated and expanded our communication about what we were doing. That included adding a web page on accessibility, really widely sharing my contact information as an access point person, so people could reach out directly, and I could begin building relationships and we could receive feedback, so that when folks were wanting access information, it wasn't just a web page. They got to interact with a real human. And we also developed detailed descriptions of our events and access services, and really started including those everywhere we could. So event posting, newsletters, social media, and then repeated again at the beginning of our events to really show that we were making a shift towards more accessible practice. And this communication framework was really crucial in letting our entire audience know about our virtual shift to COVID, not just related to accessibility or disability, but letting people know what was happening and how they could engage with our museum virtually. And the last thing is really about budgeting the time and money. This was a gradual process. I'm currently working 25 hours a month, so it's still a process that we're developing. But at this point, accessibility has really been integrated into our financial and strategic plan. It's built in from the start to all of our grants and project plans, and that's really a necessary part of supporting the work. One thing I want to mention about that, we have an exciting development. We are a historic building. We're the first purpose-built museum in the United States, and we're undergoing a massive renovation. And because of this access work and the leadership of Nancy Proctor and Krista Green, our co-directors, we have managed to have an elevator be part of the renovation. So when we reopen to the public, there will be an elevator in a historic building, which is very, very exciting. So some of the takeaways from the shift to virtual program for us, there's been positives and negatives. I know everyone has experienced that. Some of the positives for us have been, we've expanded our reach far outside of Baltimore. All of our events are attended by people who are not in Baltimore or even Maryland. We've tripled our numbers of people served through our virtual programs. And because we've been doing accessibility, we have begun to serve more people with disabilities. However, we also know that there are many ways that virtual and web-based programs will never be accessible or enjoyable for most folks, especially because we live in a city where many people do not have equitable access to the internet, to name just one element. So our commitment in the future is really to provide a hybrid model of in-person and virtual programming. We see benefits to both. We want to offer our community variety and choice, and so they can decide themselves what is the most accessible and enjoyable form of engagement. And that choice is really another cornerstone of accessibility. So thank you so much for your time and joining us in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other presenters and the discussion at the end. I'd now like to pass it on to Katie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Robin, for passing it to me. I am a white Caucasian light-skinned woman with blonde hair. I am in a blue tank top with yellow polka dots, and you may see some red in my ear pods here, so I can concentrate better. My background, it's white closet doors with some pictures hanging on the walls, and the wall color's light tan. So I am the curator of education at the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport. I'm actually not in my office or actually the state of North Carolina at this exact moment. I am in Columbia, South Carolina. However, I wanted to acknowledge the ancestral lands that the museum in Southport do sit on. So they sit on the ancestral lands of historical indigenous tribes, including those of Siouan indigenous lineage. Their early history has been mostly invisible, forgotten, and has not been completely written. During the colonial era, complex violence and sustained displacement and removal was forced upon these people. Much important information was lost. Today, North Carolina recognizes this broad contemporary indigenous land as Cape Fear. With American Indians living in all 100 counties and urban areas, we invite you to return to your institution and community, learn about the indigenous people that lived on the land, and engage and support the recognition and respect for those people. Join us in making today's Native American Indian people visible, included, and fully served in your activities, communications, and media expressions, and in the mission of your institution. I would also like to say that since I am in Columbia, South Carolina, that this location is also home to Indigenous Siouan lineage as well. I will be sharing some PowerPoint with you so that you can kind of see what the museum looks like and get a feel for some of the things that we do there. All right. Hopefully this will work. We've practiced it, but that doesn't always mean that it'll show up. Ooh, okay. So, digital accessibility and inclusion, first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk about this. My job at the Maritime Museum is not one that focuses on accessibility. I come to the topic through a master's in teaching. And the screen here is the front entryway of the museum. It's a whitewashed brick and siding building with a blue sign that says North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport. Our ship's wheel is dark blue, light blue, and kind of a burnt orangish red. Out front, it was a beautiful day when this picture was taken. You see lots of greens in the grass and trees and lots of plants. So I'm going to go through just how we got to the point that we're at. So we have started our accessibility and inclusion about fall of 2018. And at that time, we started a Sensory Saturday, and that really was focused on the autism community and the sensory processing disorder community, and lots of anybody was welcome. And so we had worked for about a year to get all of these accessibility and inclusion programming folded into public programs, as well as our exhibits. And so we then became a certified autism center in March of 2020. And if you are familiar with March of 2020, as I'm sure is a big date for a lot of people, we became the first certified autism center in the state of North Carolina 7 days before we went into temporary closure. And so while we were all quite sad that it was kind of lost in everything else that was going on, it really gave us a chance to stop and look at um, how we wanted to implement this. So as we started moving into the digital sphere, it was offering different options for crafts and offering virtual programs to try and still provide inclusion to these various communities that we had worked so much with prior to closure. But we didn't want to lose that. We didn't want to lose our passion for inclusion. So we moved Sensory Saturday virtual. We did a live craft time that always offered, do you want to use scissors? Do you want to use tape or glue? We tried to also model if your hands are spread open versus if you are fisted hand, and really tried to just give all of the different things that we could think of, right? And through that, we've had a lot of fun. It's given us an ability to flex our inclusion muscles. We make sure that we're captioning videos, especially for some of those accents that may be a little bit unfamiliar um, to pick up. So we make sure that we go back and review any of the captions that are like auto put in. We try and describe images that are on screens to the best of our abilities. And we always let people know where you can access captions to turn them on or off. While also in temporary closure, we started working with the Department of Health and Human Services, Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, to create a digital semi-guided tour. So while we are still working towards including American Sign Language and including more vivid and robust visual descriptions, we made sure that when you do come into the museum that you can access and learn through an ASL interpreter. So hopefully if you can see the slides that hopefully are pulled up on your screen too, our interpreter brought her mother in to first test run the tour. And so that was something that we want to move towards in other programming. However, we're starting small. We're a staff of 3. We don't have a dedicated accessibility person or coordinator, and we're doing small steps to try and make that happen. We've also started working with the Department of Health and Human Services, Services for the Blind, to make the physical space in the museum more accessible. But also, we are trying to keep in mind describing pictures if you're reading a book, trying to describe what I look like, what the background is as we've modeled thus far, and really bringing to the forefront and the intentional reasons of inclusion, and to really share as best we can the understanding that people learn differently, people need access. Sorry guys. Need access in different ways. And so because I come to museum education from a teaching background, I started with neurodiverse communities and the Sensory Saturdays and the autism specialties, but we are moving more and more towards physical accessibility as well. And so keeping that in mind when you're designing virtual programs or hosting these presentations, then also directly relates to when you're back in your museum, if it's reopened or not. So that's really kind of briefly what we do. We certainly try our best to acknowledge that we are not the ultimate professionals. We are trying to do what we can. We are always open for feedback and, hey, will you test this out? Because we're not sure. We ask people to come through and give us their honest opinions and try and have a conversation to better understand and to better our museum and our institution and our section of North Carolina. So I look forward to the comments and the questions. Like I said, I'm more than happy to share any of those pictures. But now you get to hear from Meredith.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Katie. So I am Meredith Peruzzi. I am using American Sign Language today, and you should be hearing the voice of the interpreter. I'm a white woman with long brown hair, and I have a green shirt with a cat on it. So really, I want to start with acknowledging our land that the museum takes place on, from the Piscataway and Nacotchtank tribes. Those Indigenous people, we currently are using their space, and we are currently doing active work on the university by re-examining the names of all of our people who have had any policies against Indigenous peoples. And currently I am involved with the committee to decolonize our university in that way. And that is one place where we are starting for the future for Indigenous people involvement in the process. So one thing, I do really want to thank Katie for mentioning something very important. The importance of communicating with people who use your services. Obviously, any time that you have an audience to survey or any kind of visitors evaluations, then you do expect to include disabled people in that process. But really, there's not many studies about how interviews, deaf and disabled people are separated from the able-bodied hearing audience. Really, over time, there really hasn't been a lot of research in that. But one phrase that is very common in the disabled community is nothing about us without us. And that really does speak to some key points in development in any kind of accessible program or project, as well as a model. And the involvement has to have a separate level of accessibility that users can survey and test. And that varying needs are met as well. But it is important to remember that each disabled person is an individual. Using the deaf and hard of hearing community as an example, because I am involved in that community, it does apply to others of different varieties, as well as blind people and visually impaired. But speaking specifically about the deaf and hard of hearing community, I prefer to use American Sign Language. That's my language. But obviously, many other deaf and hard of hearing people do not use sign language at all. So providing interpreters may not always be the best answer for your audience. If you have a hard of hearing audience who will prefer maybe oral interpreting or live captioning, you can also analyze when you provide different kinds of access. What the individual needs, we want to meet that, and we want to make sure it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, because it's easier, because it's cheaper, because you have to find the common denominator. We want to really focus on what you can do to best use your resources. We want to make sure we're working on accessibility and not just a general accessibility. Deaf and disabled people come in a different variety. Sometimes we don't think of deaf and hard of hearing people in the audience. We think of it as just a four-walled surface. Imagine if you're a hard of hearing person, maybe you use a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, and you come into a room where the floor is concrete. That creates sound to bounce off of the floor. And that becomes a problem for people with some level of hearing, where they can't identify the communication that's being presented to them and what's going on in the room around them. And this does not mean all disabled people are the same. It just means, what are you assuming of deaf and hard of hearing people? It may not be actually what they need. So you want to make sure you're really asking them what their needs are as an individual. And some disabled people are experts in their own needs. So you should expect the person to tell you what their needs are if they ask for an oral interpreter, for example. Maybe you've never heard of that term. But there are interpreters whose responsibility is to re-communicate the spoken language through lip reading. If your institution has never used that before, you might feel like, why would I need to provide that? What's the reason? But if the deaf person is asking for that specific accommodation, you need to try to meet them where they are. If you're not able to find an oral interpreter, that's fine. Maybe contact someone else and see if we can get closed captions as an accessible way for your event to continue as needed. And you can't make everyone happy, obviously, but you can do the best you can with effort, seeing each disabled person as an individual and trying to understand their request, not just make that one-size-fits-all solution. Also, there are ways to improve your accessibility without spending money. There are many free resources out there. For example, if you need to caption a video, it can be very expensive to pay a company, hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the length. But really, there are free services like amara.org. You can caption things yourself. It's not easy, but it's free. There are a lot of different resources out there again that if for your web page, we do have Wave Checker that will analyze your web page and tell you where the accessibility has mistakes. So there are ways to find resources, again, without automatically asking for a consultation or figuring out what you can do for yourself. And then if you find that you need to do more, go ahead. Contact companies, contact some experts in the field. But really, you should start by doing things yourself. And I know we're talking about digital empowerment. These are things you can do for yourself. But again, there has to be some level of user testing where you find people maybe who have contacted you before for services, or maybe you have put out a call for disabled testers. There are different ways to find people to help with that kind of project. Right now, a lot of work in disabled studies, it shows that we need to recognize, and I know that I've said it before, but we need to directly recognize disabled people as individuals. And that's hard on an institution level. But every visitor who enters your museum is an individual. So it's important to make sure that we are seeing disabled people not just as visitors, but as visitors with unique needs. Doing separate studies, if you are interviewing people, visitors, or doing time and studies, then you want to figure out how you can apply that specifically to a disabled group. Disabled people are not the same as able-bodied people. So it's better you have that understanding and not just put it in a mainstream with the regular attendees. Again, Katie, she had already talked about that, surveying while people are in the first phase, but we do want to include doing surveys during your actual exhibits, your events, or whatever you're doing, and making sure that it's working for people. Make sure that you're keeping up with your accessibility. It's not a one-time thing and you're done. You want to make sure that you're keeping it accessible and keeping accessibility in the front of your mind throughout your exhibits, programs, or projects. It's a continual process. And one of the best ways to make sure that you are inclusive of disabled people is to hire disabled people. I've seen a lot of different scenarios where, oh, a disabled person can't do this job. Oh, for example, an art preparer, someone who puts up the art. Well, oh, the disabled person can't do it. They have to be able to do this, this, and this. But there are different accommodations. And if you don't look to how you can accommodate an employee, how can you accommodate a visitor? So I want to emphasize that disabled people are part of the fabric of our society. Maybe you have disabled coworkers without knowing it. But look for where you can add disabled people to your museum community, both as visitors and as colleagues. So I think right now we have about 20 minutes left for questions. I will ask Senia, I think, to come back on for that.
All right, we're all back. Thank you all for wonderful presentations, really great takeaways, and we have some good questions from our community of attendees. So this first one, I'm going to pose it to Meredith, but then I'm going to ask Katie and Robin to also weigh in on it. So the first question is it appropriate to ask potential event attendees in advance if they need the services of an ASL interpreter?
Do you mean if you know the deaf person is coming to the museum?
I would assume that the question is if you're uncertain if anybody if there's somebody who could potentially be in the crowd, just as a general statement before an event.
Oh, okay. So it's just a general audience kind of thing. So
Correct.
obviously, if a deaf person is coming, yes, you should book an interpreter if that's what they need, or if they need captions or something else. But if you don't know if a deaf or hard of hearing person is going to show up, I do suggest providing captions automatically without any kind of request. Because providing captions does provide access to not only deaf people, but different kinds of neurodiverse people. And captions can benefit people with ADHD, people who speak English as a second language. So by providing captions, you do make accommodations for those deaf visitors, but also are benefiting a lot more people in ways that interpreters don't benefit. And then if you request an interpreter, okay, you have captions, but I want an interpreter as well. Okay, yeah, definitely hire an interpreter. You always want to refer to the captions for the general audience because it does benefit a wide list of people.
Thank you, Meredith. Katie or Robin, how about we'll start with Robin. How do you handle that at the Peel?
Yeah, I mean, I have very little to add to Meredith's great response. I will say we just made a commitment to always have an ASL interpreter within our budget, because we know that so much of what deaf folks have to experience and other disabled people is asking to be accommodated before being able to show up, and we just really wanted to start building a closer relationship with the deaf community so that they know that they could come and wouldn't have to make that request. It's a lot to ask anyone to plan a week or 2 weeks in advance about attending something and doing that extra work. So it's not possible for everyone. We definitely weren't doing it when we first started this work. It's taken us years to make that possible, but that's where we are now.
Thank you. Katie?
And I did want to add something. This is Meredith. When you advertise an event, always say that accommodations are available by request, because that does let people know that you're thinking about it, that you're willing to make accommodations.
It's a great point, Meredith. Katie, any final thoughts on this question?
I certainly agree with my two co-presenters here. I think that as a teacher, you're asking about teaching accommodations, and if that's what you need to learn, then that's something that needs to occur. And I think that it's certainly, like Meredith just said, you're thinking about people, and we often write on any of our press releases, all abilities welcome, but that's Meredith's point to listing accommodations available upon request is absolutely something that will be added to our marketing materials now.
It's great advice. Okay, on to our next question. I'm going to pose this one to Robin, but then also ask Katie and Meredith to weigh in. So Robin, how do you fund ASL interpreters and human-created closed captioning for all of your events? The asker said we looked into closed captioning and it was thousands of dollars for each event. So any thoughts there, some guidance?
Yeah. So again, like I said, it takes time, but it's the same. We just view it as the same way we would view what are any things necessary, any budget items necessary to putting on events. I mean, we couldn't have an event if we didn't pay a presenter or if we didn't have a Zoom account to host it. And so we see access as just part of that. And again, that goes back to starting to have it be part of our budget from the beginning and in our grant requests. I will say that our captions are not $1,000 an event. I am not sure where you're finding that information. So I would encourage you to look around. I'd say for our captions, it's around $100 for an hour, sometimes a little less depending on what you're providing. So it ranges, but definitely there's other options out there. And I know that one of the things that we're offering with this talk is a list of resources. So I'm sure that if that's not on there already about where to find good captions, I'm sure Meredith can talk more about that too. That will definitely offer some suggestions because it shouldn't be that much.
Thank you. Katie, how about you? Any suggestions for funding sources for this type of?
I think I agree with Robin. It's if your institution is going to stand for accessibility and inclusion, then it's something you just have to budget for. I will say that we don't often offer live digital programming with we don't offer any with an ASL interpreter that's live. We do captions, however, when we upload videos to YouTube and Facebook, they come with, like, you can auto generate captions and I just go through and check them. So it is very time consuming, but that's free. There's only 3 of us. That's what we have to do. And as Meredith mentioned with the first question, with captions being important, I also am now living in the South, and I have a hard time understanding people. Sometimes the accents can be really tricky. And so captions, it's not only just a developmental or a physical need, it's a regional. Where I'm in the South, I don't talk like that, and I need the assistance of captions a lot of times. So I think that, it is a lot of legwork. It is time consuming, and technology can be very frustrating. But again, if your institution is for that, if you're taking a stand for inclusion, you have to do it.
Thanks, Katie. Meredith.
And don't forget as well, building access into different budgets. You don't want to have to scramble for the money if someone ends up requesting something. You can save a specific amount and hold it and say, this is our accessibility money right here. If you need more, then that's when you look for it. And if you don't need everything you saved, that's great. But have that money put away just to make sure you have a bottom line for your budget.
Thank you, Meredith. So we have about 5 more minutes for questions. I'm going to pose this next one to Katie because it's something that you brought up in your talk. The question is, what exactly is a certified autism center, and what is the process to become one?
Absolutely. So it's something that I love to talk about. So I'm happy that it's asked. So there's one certifying agency that certifies organizations and institutions and any business as a certified autism center. So the process is, it looks a little different per your organization. For us, we're a small organization. We did some online training. We had to have 80% of our frontline staff go through training. And so I went through, I think, a 14-hour course. The manager, Lori, also went through a different 14-hour course. Mine focused on autism in teaching and students. My boss did the portion more focused on tourism. And then our volunteers, most of our volunteers who sit at the front desk, did like a 30-minute awareness training and kind of like a, hey, here's what you could expect. So that's kind of the overall length of time is really dependent on how quickly you can get those check marks done, right? Like how often or how quickly can you get your to-do list? Our physical building is fairly small, so we did not have to undergo an audit, and we've been doing a lot of like self-research and trainings and those sorts of things prior to. And the certifying agency, and the initials is IBCCES. They did not come do a physical audit of our building because of what we could provide. So I highly recommend you looking into it. There are different options for your budgetary size as well. But it really has given us, while we did the work before, it gave us that stamp of, we are dedicated to this. This is something that we allocated money for. We had an anonymous donor who funded the entire thing because this person felt it was needed and believed in our staff and what we set out to do. I can go into much more detail and answer more specific questions. I'm happy to, but I definitely suggest looking at their website as a first step.
Thank you, Katie. And I think before we go on with the last question or two, can each of you just tell us how many staff you have at your museum? Because you really are all working at very small institutions. So Katie, I'm looking at you. Why don't you start?
Yeah, so there's 3 of us that are full-time. That myself as the educator, I do all the programming, our manager, and then we have a visitor and volunteer services coordinator. I will say that our Maritime Museum is one of 3 in the state of North Carolina. So we do have people that work not in our building, but will assist us. So we do kind of have some flex employees, but just not on site.
Thanks, Katie. Meredith?
I'm the only one who is full-time at my museum right now, but we do have 2 part-time people who are involved pretty often. So they are equal, we should say.
Thank you. And Robin?
So our museum has 2 co-directors, and together they're both part-time but equal 1 full-time position. And then there's about 10 of us who are all very, very part-time, our hours range from 5 hours a week, I think, to 20. So we're a lot of part-time contracted workers.
I just thought it was important to establish that because all 3 of you are doing really amazing work at institutions with very small staff and budget sizes to match. So thank you. All right, so this next question, and whoever feels the most comfortable answering it, do you have any resources on how to best create descriptive text for museum and archival items specifically? And then it's even more specific. It says, for example, should they include the type, medium, time, period of creation? And I don't know that we can get too far into that, but maybe just a short answer for resources.
I'll jump in. That's a lot of the work we're doing right now. Again, where the resources that we'll share, I know for a fact there's a couple that we have linked, but the first place that I go to is the Cooper Hewitt. They have a great 2-pager guidelines on their website. If you just Google Cooper Hewitt visual descriptions, it'll pop up. So that's a really good place to start. And then as far as the kind of tombstone information, you're really just trying to provide what is being communicated in the image and not with the text on the web page. So if someone who is not a not blind person is reading the title, the medium, all of that, the blind person will also be reading that. So it wouldn't need to be included in the alt text.
Great, thank you, Robin. Katie or Meredith?
I love Robin's answer for that question, but I did just want to add that deaf-blind people are often overlooked by museums. So thank you so much for mentioning it. But deaf-blind people now have a Braille machine that they can carry around that has Braille that comes up, a refreshable Braille. So that is something that deaf-blind people can use to, quote, quote, see what's happening in the museum in real time. So that is something to keep in the back of your mind, that there is technology out there now that can serve deaf-blind visitors as well.
That's great. Thank you, Meredith. And I can't wait to see all of these resources pop up in the hub and have a place to direct people to find them. So we are at about time, and we are, for this very first module, really trying to keep to our time. We really appreciate everybody, all of the attendees and our presenters working through this with us. This was our first go at it, so thank you all. And I just really want to say thank you all for attending today's program on digital accessibility and inclusion, and a huge thanks to our presenters, to Robin, to Katie, and to Meredith for terrific presentations and for adding reality and inspiration to this topic. So just a few final reminders before we close out. You can visit the forum on our website at museum-hub.org to ask any questions related to these presentations or additional tech questions about any of the topics that were brought up today or anything going forward. We'd also ask you to follow us on social media. We have a lot of social media pages, so whatever your platform of choice is, you can find the Museum Learning Hub there. And I just want to say thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day and week.